welcome back to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We're your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we are glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. In this podcast, we talk about real sales issues, big and small, for salespeople, selling situations, and sales leadership. Collectively, we have over 50 years of sales, selling leadership, and sales acumen under our belts, and we're here to share a little bit of that with you in the next 15 minutes. We're glad you're here. Enjoy the show. We're back here, and what's fun about what Sean and I do is that we get to bring on seasoned veterans who are not only seasoned at sales leadership, but they're seasoned at their craft of consulting and sales leadership and fractional leadership. We're joined by a person today from Texas who needs no introduction, but Chris, tell the audience who you are, where you're from, and how you got here today.
Well, thanks, Kevin. So my name is Chris Goade. My business is 360 Consulting. We're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've been a sales acceleration advisor since November of 2015, which means I was very early in the game. I was number 16 ever in the sales acceleration world. And it was such a cool opportunity. I think I shared with you guys, you know, in my W-2 life, having worked for really good companies, Dr. Pepper, PepsiCo, 3M, others that you might not recognize. The one thing that I accidentally discovered by making all the mistakes you could possibly make was that great sales organizations, even in those great companies, I had to rebuild or build teams or take over organizations. And there was always kind of this, you know, in every other part of the business, there was a process in operations or production or finance. And sales was, hey, here's our stuff, you know, go sell it. And nobody really measured anything except the result. You know, if the result was good, everybody was happy. And if the result was not that good, then there was all the angst that revolves around that. And so for me, to be successful in that world, I figured out that I had to teach people how to do things. I had to manage, measure, hold accountable, create teams who bought into process. And so because of that, I just learned, again, accidentally, I believe, by learning from others, by reading, by going through training, by becoming a trainer, a sales trainer, just all these different ways of pulling things together. And so when Sales Acceleration reached out to me in August of 2015, I knew there was this huge need in the market. I had kind of lost my joy for the corporate life and I had thought about doing this as a business. And gosh, I looked at the website and I'm wow, someone has built a model around what I've been thinking about for years. And so I just frankly pulled the ripcord and started from scratch. And, you know, I think it's been one of the most enjoyable things that I've ever done in my life. It changed my life. But the reason for that, Kevin, really is that we get to help people, you know. We get to help entrepreneurs, business owners. We get to help their salespeople, their sales leaders. And it gets me up every day and it just keeps me excited to go out and do it. I think there's so many stories to tell around that, but ultimately 8 years later, still my feet hit the ground every day and I'm excited to go do it.
That's awesome, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to dig into one of those things that you just said, because I think it's really important. And that is that you had to implement processes and training and best practices in your corporate world. And I'm sure that in the small businesses, most of the people that listen to our podcast are either salespeople that may or may not have a good manager, sales managers that want to be a better manager, and then CEOs of small companies, mid-sized companies that want to have a better sales organization. Either they're running it themselves or maybe they have a manager in place, and maybe they're really small and they are the salesperson as well. So that's kind of our target market for our podcast here. And a lot of the things that I tend to find, and I'm curious to hear what you say, is that they don't have the processes that typically are built out in those large companies. You mentioned some pretty big companies there. Typically, those companies have a do it this way because we've learned that most salespeople that do it this way are successful at the end of the day. So they have some best practices and some teaching and some processes in place to help them through. That smaller company doesn't have that history, and they're really looking for, how do I solve the problem? What's the silver bullet of sales? I get that question all the time. And I say, there is no silver bullet. It's just a lot of hard work. But it's not just a lot of hard work. It's hard work with some processes. Really interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because even the big companies I worked for really didn't have great structure or great process. I think that's what helped me, be successful, with just trying to stay true to that. Ultimately, I think every great sales organization, every great sales system has 4 key pillars. And the 4 key pillars to me are having a really defined go-to-market strategy. Who are your ideal customers? Who are not your ideal customers? What's the value proposition that you deliver for them with your products and services? And then really defining how you go about that. How do you message? How do you interact? The second is, we hear sales process. I think it's poorly defined most often because I see sales process in 3 different distinct funnels. One is lead generation. How am I going to get to those customers? In some businesses, that can be very easy. In others, it can be very difficult. So oftentimes we find companies that their biggest problem really is lead gen, right? How do they get to those ideal customers and have meaningful conversations with them? So that's one funnel for sales process. Then the one that everybody knows is in sales cycle, right? If you read a sales book or go through a sales training or you look at a CRM, everybody just assumes that, well, I've already got a prospect. So that's a given, right? It's critically important, but what are the steps in that sales process? And then the third often missed one I find is account management or relationship building with your existing customers. And so many businesses don't have a process for that. I was very fortunate in my corporate life. That's where we probably, and most of the companies that I worked with in my past, before I became a consultant, we were really good at that, right? QBRs, quarterly business reviews, and really drilling in and continuing to deliver high value for your customers and building relationships. But in small businesses, I find often there's not a defined process for that. And then the third key pillar for me, I say people, but it's not just the people themselves. It's actually, what are the responsibilities that you need in your sales team? What are the seats, right? And who's going to be accountable for those responsibilities in that sales work? And then compensation and how you hire and onboard and train and develop people. That's a critically important one. And then the fourth killer app is how are you going to manage all this stuff? And I think that's where so many of the businesses that I work for in my W-2 line and the companies that I work with now as a consultant, what are the most important things to manage your sales team? I always look at it like this. If I'm managing, well, how many phone calls did you make? How many meetings did you have? All of those things. If I'm managing that, I probably have the wrong salespeople. I'm not saying it's important. It is important. It's important, and there's an accountability for that. But to me, it's not a management thing. It's a coaching thing. It's a training thing. And then the tools that you're going to use, the CRM and your dashboards, and what are the right KPIs and all that management stuff. How to hold good meetings, how to hold good one-on-one interactions. So if you have those 4 key strong pillars, it's a 4-legged stool, not a 3-legged stool. But if you have those really foundational things in your business, then you can have a great sales organization.
Completely agree. And I think you hit on something there that I think probably bears digging into a lot more on the side of activities, because being a VP of sales should not be, managing, did you make your dials today? That's a fruitless kind of thing. But for a lot of our listening audience, we want to make sure we differentiate between, hey, you do need to do that, but that's not the only thing you need to do. So can you kind of give us maybe a rundown of how you implement versus track? Because going from no outbound to some outbound, but focusing on different leadership pieces.
I think, Kevin, it's different for every business. And quite frankly, it's different for every salesperson in every business. So if you just take that as an example, let's say that you and I are salespeople for a company. I may be great at making phone calls and generating all of the prospects that I need, really getting that interaction and getting stuff into my funnel, right, into sales cycle. You may be great at doing it in a different way. You might be great at going out and making cold calls or visiting past customers or going to networking functions or whatever. So ultimately what I like to do is I like to go backwards. Here are our goals. So if we use some of the tools that we have in the framework as an example, here are my goals, and I back into how many deals I need in my funnel, what's my closing percentage, what's my sales cycle, how long is my sales cycle, back into those things. Then I can get to how many leads I need to generate for new customers. And then I work with individual salespeople to say, what works for you? Because it could be different for Kevin than it is for Chris. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be the same as long as it produces the result. So I think that's how you create accountability. And I find that if you do that and you do it in a meaningful way, then let's say that Sean's our sales leader and he does that process with you and I separately. We both now have ownership in what we have to do to get the stuff into our funnel. And we have basically, in essence, created our own accountability. And now Sean can hold us accountable. So I don't think that it's cookie cutter when you get down to that lead generation stuff, because again, every salesperson is different. I could use some of the things that you use, and you could use some of the things I use, and that's okay. But I think it's more than just, hey, you know what, make 25 calls every day. That may or may not work.
I find that interesting. It's a leveraging point. It's the part that makes us get the results we need with the people we have and the customers we're focused on. It's that tailoring of our message. And it's why, frankly, we're able to bring all of that to bear. And you mentioned a product that Sales Acceleration just released in the framework. And it's really that, what is the true north for the sales department to manage activity, expectation, customer experience against? So you've seen a lot of change from 2015 till today. We went through a global pandemic. I heard somebody call it a global sickness last week. But we've been through and experienced and lived through a lot of changes in the sales dynamic. What's been the largest change that you've witnessed firsthand?
Well, that's a great question. I talk about this a lot with companies that we work with. And I think the biggest difference today is that lead generation portion of selling and marketing has changed so much. There are multiple reasons for it. I don't think it's one thing. Number one, technology has made everyone ADD, whether you are or not, right? So we're very reactionary, and we're getting bombarded from messages everywhere. It's not just email or phone calls anymore, right? It's emails, it's phone calls, it's social media, it's this, it's that. And then to that point, I believe that people are just inundated, and many of those tools have been what I would define as abused, by using automation for LinkedIn, automation for email marketing, where, how many messages do you get every day that you're just like, you have no idea. Like, you sent me an email or you connected with me on LinkedIn and sent me a message on LinkedIn. You literally have no idea what my business is, what I do, right? And you're making all of these assumptive statements. And I think because of that, in the selling world, every business has to truly focus on what are the tools that they're going to use. How are they actually going to rise above all the noise and the clutter and distinguish themselves so that the prospects that should be talking to them actually pay attention enough to actually have a conversation. And I think that's what's changed more than anything that I've seen. I think it's just the flood, because I say it like this, right? Hey, the good news is we have all of these different ways to communicate with our customers and our prospective customers. And the bad news is we have all of these different ways to communicate with our customers and prospective customers. So, how are you going to change that? And it's difficult, right? And honestly, I think in some ways now, businesses have to look at maybe doing things more old-fashioned than in new technology ways, right? Because let's face it, business today still is about relationships.
That's fantastic. I want to actually dig into that a little bit more. One of the things you talked about earlier in our conversation here was you're in your former life, when you're W-2 world, you were really good at taking care of your existing customers. And I find that a lot of my clients that are smaller, they really are not great at maintaining those relationships. So if you're okay with it, I'd love to have you back. We're past our 15 minutes, but I'd love to have you back next week on our podcast. And let's dig into, how do you maintain that long-term healthy relationship with a customer? Can you come back and help us out with that?
Love to.
Thank you very much. And that'll be all for today. Please come back next week when we get to talk to Chris Goade of 360 Consulting about how to create a better relationship with your existing customers, and then how to grow your business from there. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast of Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We hope that we were able to share some valuable insight, valuable knowledge with you to make your selling adventures easier and more successful. Please join us every week. We drop these on Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please subscribe to us in your favorite podcast player. Also, please join us on LinkedIn, where we do a CEO workshop. And that CEO workshop is dedicated monthly to big questions that CEOs are having and how to grow their business and drive sales. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Thank you very much. Have a great day.